So yeah, let's talk about the instruction of pushing the heels down in downward facing dog. I just want to say up front that it's not an incorrect instruction. I'm not saying we should stop saying it or anything like that. It's a perfectly fine instruction and very useful. But I think that we as yoga teachers say it so often that the impression that students get is that the point of downward dog is to have your heels pressing into the floor. And I intuit this because I often get the comment or the question or the furrowed brow about like, but I can't even get my heels down in downward dog, right? So what I'm interpreting from that statement is that students feel like they're not doing downward dog right if they can't touch their heels to the floor. So let's just start by saying that yes, it is a helpful instruction. For example, if people aren't using the energy of their feet in sort of a downward direction. So it is useful to say push your heels downwards. But the only thing that touching the floor with your heels means is that, maybe you have a relatively open lower leg, calf and Achilles tendon and ankle. So that isn't necessarily the only measure of a downward dog. I would actually say that in some ways pushing the heels down can actually be a hindrance to downward dog in other aspects of the shape, which we'll discuss in a moment. But, having open calves and Achilles and heels and ankles, it's sort of a limited view of what downward dog can be, right? There's so much to experience in downward dog, and that's just kind of one little sliver of an aspect of downward dog. So the other thing is, if we concentrate so much on pressing the heels down, look what it does to the shape of like my back and my hips in some circumstances. In some circumstances, if a student tries too hard to push their heels down, you see it sort of drags the sitting bones under and it brings more of a rounding to the back. Not in all cases, but in some. So we're losing something of the rest of the shape by only emphasizing or by overemphasizing this heels to the floor situation. And oftentimes, if we're pushing the heels really hard down into the ground, we get kind of a pronated foot, meaning it's rolling towards the inside, and we're getting kind of a compressed ankle at the front. So I'd rather have a balance of the energy of pushing the heels down as well as the energy of lifting the sitting bones up. So if we look at it from the view of like balancing two directions of energy, then it could go like this. You can even do this with me. Let's talk through it together. So push your heels all the way down and feel what that feels like. And then lift your sitting bones all the way up. In fact, lift your heels up as high as you can and lift your sitting bones as high as you can. Now, keep the sitting bones lifted. Try not to drop them down. Just start to descend the heels to the floor, but be very careful to stop before you feel that sort of undertoe feeling where the sitting bones are starting to droop down, right? So yes, the heels, the energy of the heels is descending towards the floor, but at the same time, the sitting bones are ascending up towards the ceiling. And that actually livens up way more aspects of the legs than just heels to the floor, right? It also balances the feet so that you're not sort of compressing the ankles and pronating, and it creates so much kind of more sensation all across the leg and the pose, at least for me. Might not be for you, but that's sort of my experience of it. Another way to think about it is to think about sort of pulling the heels and the sitting bones in opposite directions. So again, we can, here's how I sort of think about it, and maybe it's useful for you too. So from your downward dog, you can bend the knees a little bit, and then instead of just pushing the heels down or just lifting the sitting bones up, imagine you are trying to pull the heels down and the sitting bones up equally in opposite directions. So bend again, and then again, don't let the heels win, don't let the sitting bones win, but try to pull both at once. And just see what that brings about for you in the shape and in your awareness and in the sort of exploration of your practice. And as with everything in yoga, like there's not just one way to do downward facing dog. There's this way, there's heels down way, there's knees a little bit bent way. So many expressions of downward dog, and each one might be bringing our awareness and our attention to a different experience of the shape. So not to limit sort of our language, but also not to limit our experience, like there's only one way to do it. That includes what I've just said today. So what I've just said is sort of one of my favorite ways to explore downward dog, but it's certainly not the only way. So I hope that clarifies a little bit what I mean by heels down isn't the only instruction for downward dog, and it's certainly not the only experience to be had in downward dog. So I hope that sort of liberates us from feeling like gotta get the heels down. Thanks.